Hello, my name is Teresa Chickwitz, and I'm honored to be here representing Betrayal Project USA. We're a victim led organization dedicated to exposing the institutional betrayal, honoring those that we've lost, and pursuing justice for crimes committed underneath the guise of public health and COVID 19. You can learn more about our work, view victim stories, submit your own story, and get involved by visiting our website, betrayalprojectusa.org. You can follow us on Rumble, BitChute, and X, or by searching Betrayal Project USA, or going to our website and linking to our social media. You will also find Marcia Joyner, who is one of our co-hosts today from Betrayed by Hospice as well. You can also find her information on social media as well, which we will share within this interview. Today, I have the privilege of speaking with Cara Stalzer and Marcia Joyner, but Cara is going to be telling us of her story of her survival from almost being killed by hospice in Texas in a hospital there and at home. So, Cara, I'm going to hand it over to you a little bit to tell us a little bit about your background, where you're from, and what was life like before things started getting involved in hospice.
Well, I'm originally from Texas. I was born in Texas, and my family's been here since the 1800s. And I grew up near Houston, and I had wonderful grandfather and grandparents, and I was fine, and I had just gotten together and had just moved and was starting over. I'd just been through a divorce, and my son was doing great, and I was very, very happy, and probably happier than I'd ever been in my entire life. And then, it all turned upside down really quickly when I was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy. And then, that was down in Houston, and we moved up, for work, moved up to Dallas area, and I was grappling with okay, I'm never gonna, work again, and all of those things that come with such a diagnosis. And I had, just, started over, and, I was wondering what was going to happen to me. And then you know, had some back issues. I had a couple of I had a back surgery, and then I had a neck surgery. And then, I had some back pain issues. I went and found a new doctor, and of course, he, ran with the muscular dystrophy, uh, take on all of it. And eventually it just, led to next thing I know, I was on palliative care. And then next thing I knew, I was on hospice. And I had just turned 50 years old. And, it was heartbreaking, that all this for, what's going to happen to my son? I'll never get to see him get married, or I'll never know my grandchildren. And just the thoughts that come with this is it. And then, but I was not prepared for the drugs, the neglect, the abuse, the cruelty of some of the nurses and caregivers, and the callousness. I was not prepared for them trying to murder me. It was supposed to be comfortable. It was supposed to be a peaceful transition. It was supposed to be, wonderful and caring and loving and a great environment to, say goodbye to everyone and have that, time. And I did not. It was anything but. It was they tried to murder me. And they admitted it. I've got the evidence. They wrote it all down. To how could I say no? I could not say no. You can't do this. No, I went off a hospice because they would just more drugs, more medications. And thankfully I had, my wonderful other half. If it weren't for him, I would not have survived. At one point, several points, but he actually took me out of the unit, because they were trying to murder me. And I told him, I said, "You've got to get me out of here. They're trying to kill me." And he said, "Okay, babe, let's go." And
So
they tried.
if I can ask you to kind of clarify, at the beginning, when you went into hospice, you were at your home, and so you
Right.
had in-home hospice, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So what did they say? They said that they were putting you in. What your qualifications were was the muscular dystrophy.
Correct. They
Okay,
said
and
that
did they,
I was in the later stages of the disease,
okay, and
so
did they get you to sign a DNR when you went in?
yes, yes, they did.
Okay, did
They
they
said
pressure
that
you?
was they just said that was, they just made it sound like it would be horrible if I didn't. It
Right,
would be that this allowed them to, uh, that way I wouldn't be, suffering as much. And it was just standard procedure.
right.
Everybody did. And,
So
it was
what
just
did
kind
they
of part
tell
of the
you?
paperwork, that I signed.
Right. What did they tell you that they were going to be able to do for you in your home? Like, what was the hook? Were they going to give you a bath? And, what were they going to do for you that was necessary?
Well, they were going to, that way I didn't have to worry because I couldn't drive. I can't drive. At the time I was unable to drive. And that way they could just treat me in my home. And I wouldn't have to worry about making doctor's appointments and going through all of that. And they would just come to me and take care of me. And if I ever needed anything, then, everybody was just a phone call away. And, they made it sound wonderful, easy. And that way I wouldn't have to worry about all of these other things, you know, on top of, worrying about, you know, I'm going to die.
Wow.
And
Wow.
then also they would help me with those arrangements or anything that I might need. It was just overwhelming. It was just, you know, um, you get that kind of news, and then on top of that, before I can process it,
Mhm.
here's all these people surrounding me, and the next thing I knew, there's a hospital bed, there's oxygen machine, there's a CPAP machine, and a bed tray and a potty beside my bed, and in one day there's all of these things. And then the medication, muscle relaxers, it started with the pain medicine. And and I'm just still reeling. I remember just reeling over so this is it, you know
Overwhelming. Yeah,
and
right.
this is how it happens. So, and how long is it going to be? 6 months or less isn't that long. Um, and just memory lane, and, you know, thinking of everything that I was going to miss and all of the things that I never got to do.
Yeah.
Right. That is so cruel.
You
And
know,
because if you get a life sentence, whether you have congestive heart failure or kidney disease, the muscular dystrophy, whatever it is, and they say, well, you've got 6 months to live, they're not God. And they don't know if it's 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, a year. And to immediately put you into that, making you feel like you're going to die, say your goodbyes, and putting all of that equipment in there, it's got to be very frightening for you.
It
So did
it
they give
was
you
it was
did they give you a comfort kit?
what?
Did, did they give you a bag of medicine there in case? Can you talk about what was in that box?
Well,
The comfort
that
kit?
actually inside that box is, it's a kill kit. It's enough medicine, that it would kill someone. But they never put it that way. They sat it in my bedroom and set it right there for in case they told my family, they told the caregivers, my friends even, that if I ever was in any distress, that it was okay. Everything was pre-measured. They didn't have to worry about it. They could just give me the medicine in there and it would make me, comfortable. And that's
Were
why
you
they
in
wrote on
pain?
it. Not as
Were
much.
you in pain?
um, it didn't matter whether I was in pain or not.
Hmm.
Of course I wasn't in any pain with all the medicine they were giving me, but it didn't stop them from increasing the dosage. And I got to where I would spit out the medication. I would hide it under my bed and I would get people, friends, and certain, people I trusted to hide boxes of Roxanol and other drugs in a drawer that I had that I knew they never looked in, because I don't think they either didn't care or didn't realize that I knew they were going through my things. I would hear them laugh and talk to each other sometimes when they thought I was sleeping and say, well, it's not like she's ever going to wear this again, or it's not like she's going to ever use this. She don't need that, and they just robbed me blind,
They were
Wow.
you know.
taking your things?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Oh, Lord.
Yes. They stole most all of my jewelry and a lot of my clothes. You know, any shoes, high heels, they did, you know, and 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 then they kind of had me. I thought that was awful, but at the same time, I remember at times I was going, wait a minute, but I couldn't. It was all like I was so drugged up that it was
Sure.
more of my mind saying it. I was aware of it, but I couldn't actually verbalize it because the words weren't, I couldn't, I was slurring so badly, because of the medication and I couldn't fight back. But I remember thinking many times, wait a minute, I wanted, so and so to have that. I was going to give that to my son, that's not yours, and
No,
then I just, you
no
know,
way.
go to sleep, again, pass out or, from the drugs that kick in. And, they were cruel. Sometimes they would even, say when they would leave and, it was just me there by myself and, shift changer, they were leaving. And they would say, well, I'll see you tomorrow. And sometimes they'd giggle and laugh and actually say, or maybe I won't,
Wow.
like,
Oh,
you know,
really?
I might, maybe I'll be dead, and they won't have to work.
Can I ask you, kind of taking a step back for just our listeners listening in? So, somebody that has been given, a diagnosis of muscular dystrophy, just the process. So, we're trying to wonder, how do you end up in a hospital, starting with a diagnosis like this? Do they sit down with you and tell you like all the options of things that they would recommend, or how does that process work? Going from getting your diagnosis to actually ending up in a hospital where, they're drugging you to death. What can you walk us through that step?
I there was no explanation given to me. There was no one that really explained it to me. I kept asking them. I don't understand this. I thought it was hereditary, and no one in my family has ever had muscular dystrophy that I know of. And it was as if I wasn't even talking. They just, would keep talking over me or dismiss me completely, my questions, as if, okay, they knew what they were doing. Just shut up and trust them.
Mhm.
I didn't need to know.
Mm.
They didn't know. Sometimes it was more of, well, it's different with each person. And I kept going, well, what kind of muscular dystrophy do I have? Um, and in the beginning, I was tested for myotonic dystrophy and, you know, s- um, another type of, I forget the name of right at the moment. I was tested for certain types and they were negative, and they just never tested me again. They never found out what, you know, type of muscular dystrophy I had. No one ever bothered. And then uh, they just started writing down types of muscular dystrophy. And Gower's muscular dystrophy was the one that was listed that they put me on hospice for. And I didn't know, because by then I was already on a lot of pain medications and so weak and tired, from everything and overwhelmed. And I was sad too at,
Sure.
reeling from the diagnosis as well and not knowing what to expect and frightened. And then I later found out, I believe it was the Gower's muscular dystrophy. I found out it's only in little boys. It affects boys. So there's no
Wow.
way I could have had that.
Wow.
But I had I've learned since that there's a difference between having, trust and faith in your doctor. And what I had then was just blind faith. I
Yeah.
didn't know any better. I just trusted them. Well, they're the ones who went to school. They're the ones who have the degree. They're the ones with the letters after their name. They're agreeing, so they must be right. And you know, I didn't know then what I know now.
Okay.
Now that doesn't happen to me.
So basically, so you're given the diagnosis. You
Mhm.
decide, yes, I want to go take their advice, what they're telling me to do. Go check into the hospital, right? They're making it sound like you're going to be given some pain medication that's going to make you have a very pleasant experience to be able to manage
They
this condition. Yeah.
they didn't check me into a hospital.
Okay.
They just next thing I know, my home was flooded with all of this equipment, and next thing I know, I'm completely helpless and signing papers and thinking about my son and, you know, everything about dying,
Mm, yeah.
you know,
Okay.
and that's that's all. I didn't have time. I didn't have it was overwhelming to the point of I didn't know what to do. And there was no one to ask because no one else knew either. Because they're all trusting the doctors, you
Hmm.
know? I was duped. I was lied to. I was tricked. I was betrayed,
Yeah.
ultimately betrayed,
So
and I didn't know what to do,
you had
honestly.
you had talked about some of the medications they started to add. It seems every day, or I don't know how often, they added different medication. And I'm going to share one here on the stage. But it was for people to see here that you were given fentanyl, and so you
Mhm,
already mentioned that you weren't in any pain. Can you tell us
mhm.
a little bit about this? What was this like?
That was in addition to a lot of other medications I was on, and that just made me feel like putty. I mean, just like a wet noodle. I could not function on it. I couldn't. I remember trying to pick it, trying to pull it off my, my chest, and I couldn't do that. It was like in slow motion. I was, it took so much for me to think, and to get my body to go with what I was thinking, to make the movement, to pull it off, for example, that by the time I got there, I was worn out and I couldn't, take it off. I didn't have the strength. I was so weak.
If I can interject at this point, fentanyl, for the people that don't realize this, fentanyl is 100 times stronger than morphine, 50 times stronger than heroin. It is given on a transdermal patch that you put on. It starts at 12.5 micrograms. It is measured in micrograms because it is the potency of it, whereas normally you do a milligram. This is a microgram. They were giving her two patches, 100 micrograms each. So at 110 pounds, she was being given 200 micrograms. That in itself could knock somebody completely out. In 2017, that's the first time I'd heard about it. That was one of the drugs they used on my mom. But in 2017, that's when the police officers would find the powder, the illegal type, and they would touch it, and they were going into, having heart attacks, and they were giving them Narcan to take them out of that. But what they're giving her, the 200 micrograms, it's considered a medical dose, but it is just incredibly strong, especially for her at 110 pounds. That is a dangerous amount. So that is meant to completely, if she was not going down soon enough with the other medication they were giving her, the Roxanol, which she's talked to you about, is the same thing as morphine. It is a liquid morphine plus the other medicine that Teresa will show you. That alone with this fentanyl is amazing that you survived, Cara. Amazing. It's horrible that they did all of this to you.
Yeah, I remember there was one time when I was down to 2 breaths a minute, and that's what was written in my medical records. But I don't remember that so much as I remember a nurse that came into my bedroom, and she sat down, and her only job was to write down my time of death. And
Well,
they had her sit by my bed. And my partner came in, and he kept checking on me every hour, every 2 hours. And I remember she told him, I'm here. You don't have to do that. That's why I'm here, what I'm here for. Go ahead and go get some rest. You don't need to keep checking on her. And he said, what makes you think I'm checking on just her? I'm checking on you too.
Yeah.
And, and, that's him, and that's why I think they, made sure that I was alone when they took me out of the apartment, when they overdosed me, then took me out of the apartment and put me in their, hospice unit and tried to, kill me there.
so talk a little bit about that. So you're at your home and a transport unit shows up from hospice, and without asking your permission and your
Right.
significant other's not there, they are aware of this, then what
Mhm.
happens? They just show up and
They just showed up. They walked in the door and just took me,
okay, so that's
just
to
took me.
it's like a hospice respite facility, and
Mhm.
that's where they take you so they can do
Right,
anything. There's somebody there, and
right.
they can do 24 hours drugging you, constant
Yes. And
drugging.
that's what they did. I was trying to get away. I wanted out of there. I knew I had to get out of there. And I was climbing over the bed railings and falling on the floor repeatedly. And they would just leave me on the floor sometimes for a length of time.
Punishment. A punishment.
And I kept doing it. They put an alarm under me that would sound off every time I tried. They finally did that, and then they put rubber mats all around my bed, to, you know, but they never X-rayed any. They never X-rayed my shoulders or my hips or anything. I mean, I could have easily broken something and, never known it with all the drugs that I was on, and they didn't care. They never cared about whether I had been hurt, because that's hospital floors are hard. That
Sure.
they are very hard to land on from a hospital bed. And, they just acted like I was inconveniencing them. They were angry with me.
Yeah,
And
we're an
they,
inconvenience, yes, to
right.
their
Yeah,
daily
how
routine.
dare I not cooperate and just go to sleep and never wake up?
Yeah.
Because
Now,
that's
did
what
they
they
let
wanted.
you, did they help you get out of bed to go to the toilet? Or at this point, did they just put you in Depends on a
Yeah.
catheter or what?
Yes.
What did they do?
I was in diapers most of the time. I spent probably almost 3 years in a hospital bed. They did not want me to get up. They wouldn't let me get up. They had the rails up on the bed. Because I was so doped up that they knew I would fall. I couldn't stand up. I couldn't have gotten out of that bed if I'd have wanted to,
Wow.
because of all the drugs that they had me on, and you know, it was very frustrating and I felt trapped,
Trapped. Sure.
I felt like I'd been kidnapped, even though I hadn't been, but I was.
You
In
had.
all essence, even though I was in my own home, I was still caged. I was, a hostage of, you know, the
The process.
drugs.
Yeah. At what point did you or another family member identify that something's wrong here? This isn't right. When did that moment occur for you?
There were several moments. One moment was that my partner walked in early from work and caught them grinding up Dilaudid in our mortar and pestle that we had in the kitchen and mixing it with water and forcing it down my throat while I was unresponsive. And he
Jeez.
yelled at them, and they ran out. They just picked up their purses and they left. And he was very angry. And couldn't couldn't believe it, and of course I was unaware of what was going on, but they did write it down that they did do that. It's in my medical records that they crushed up Dilaudid, mixed it up with water, put it in a syringe, and gave it to me.
Force fed you. Sure.
Yes.
And this time, are you able to eat anything or drink anything, or has that stopped?
Well, I was at home, and it was interesting. Every time it came time for me to eat, a lot of times, they always gave the medication first. So here's the food, and then here's the medicine, and then I go unconscious. So, I can't eat when I'm unconscious, and falling asleep, trying to eat, a bite here, a bite there. And then my partner got a mini fridge and put in my bedroom and kept it stocked full of snacks, easy for me, to get. But They didn't brush my teeth. They didn't do anything of that nature. It was only thanks to him. He'd come home from work and he would cook me dinner and sit there and make me eat it every night, you know. And he cooked a good dinner and made sure that I, you know, had some good, wholesome food, you know.
Nutrition.
Yes. And a lot of the time, you know, things in the refrigerator, the mini fridge in my room, I'm not the one who ate them, you know. They would help themselves and eat my Twinkies and my, you know,
Oh,
everything that
they
was in there. Yeah, they would, you know,
so
instead.
they came in at one point, and this all kind of started. They signed you up in 2016, and
Mhm.
I point that out because we're in 2026. So 10 years from the time that they said you were going to die in 6 months, and here we are 10 years later, and you're
Right.
alive, and you're telling me you are a miracle. And
Um,
most people don't make it through hospice. I mean, I'm tickled that you did. That's what we want to see, happen with more people. But at one point, when Shane was not there, and they came into your home and they took you to that facility and they
right.
held you there for how long were you in the
I
respite
was
facility?
I was in their hospice unit for almost a month, almost an entire month,
Okay.
until I told him that time he came in and I said, "You've got to take me home. You've got to get me out of here. They are trying to kill me."
Wow.
And he said, "Okay, babe, let's go."
Yeah.
And he got a wheelchair and he picked me up and he put me in the wheelchair and proceeded to, go down the hall, out of the room and down the hall and out the door. But they stopped him.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And it was like next thing, there's a wall of doctors, nurses, orderly, everybody there. You can't leave with her. You can't take her out of here. You don't have the authority. You can't do that. You can't leave. She's not able to leave. You can't do that. And I could tell, I could tell it was a standoff because he's not the type of person that's gonna, he's getting angry, he's
Yeah.
getting frustrated,
Mhm.
and I could tell this isn't going to work this way. They don't know him very well, but I was upset, and I just said, I bobbled my head back and looked up at him, and I said, "Call 911, call the police."
Good.
And the next thing, it was like, the Red Seas parted. They just moved out of the way, and he
Oh,
just wheeled me on down and put me in the truck and took me home. And I thought, okay, yeah, that's good. That's it. Next thing I knew, another hospice agency had signed me up.
Wow.
So, and it just the drugs started really raining down from the skies.
so did they
And
get your signature on that? Well, I
I
mean, when
don't.
they can't just sign you up, from one hospice to the next, then
I'm
they would
sure
have
they
to get your
did.
signature.
I'm sure they did, but I don't remember. I don't
Okay,
know how else to say that. I don't remember.
gotcha.
I don't remember that that's what was happening, or I don't remember signing
Hmm.
that. That's not I couldn't have many clear memories, but I do have some clear memories. That was not one of them, unfortunately.
Wow.
So you're
And
back in a new hospice, and they started ramping up the drugging process.
yes, yes, they sure did.
And so
Sure
what
did.
happened?
Well, they were delivering it to my door.
Mhm.
They would show up at my door with the medications, with the drugs. They used their own pharmacies, and And, they would have caregivers give me the medicine, and, good caregivers wouldn't. And, they'd listen to me and I'd say no. I mean, it was a war. That's what it was. It was a war. And
I
I
want
was,
to point
you
out, can you
know,
go back to that, Teresa?
Yes, yes.
Slide. Okay, so on this slide, for people that can't are looking at this visually, it's morphine, 60 milligrams, 4 tablets a day, 240 milligrams a day. And let me say again, she weighed 110 pounds. And this is in addition to the fentanyl patch they were giving her. And I believe at that time you were also being given Haldol and Ativan. Is that
methadone. They were giving me all at the same time: methadone, Dilaudid, Haldol, Seroquel, the liquid morphine every hour, 60 milligrams of that every hour under the tongue. And they were giving me more than one tablet. It was more than 2 tablets of the Dilaudid. And they were giving me the methadone. And it was easier to keep track of that until they switched it to liquid. Then I could not keep track of it
Mhm.
anymore. It was so much easier to spit out the pills
Skills?
than
Sure.
it was the liquid. And especially when they were taking even the pills before that, I guess the dissolving them in water wasn't working for them. So they switched me to liquid.
Liquid.
Hmm.
Now,
And then
the
also suppositories. They would, a lot of times they would, use suppositories too.
and they can have narcotics in the suppositories. It can either be for helping you if you're constipated, because morphine,
Mm.
um,
Yes.
Ativan, fentanyl, Dilaudid, all of that makes you constipated. But it could be for that, or they can also have opioids in them. But
Mhm.
the Haldol and the Seroquel that you said they were giving you, that's for people that are bipolar or
Right.
that have Tourette syndrome and have tics,
Mhm.
which she didn't have either of that.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
use that. That's one of the main drugs. The
Mhm.
morphine, Ativan, and Haldol are three of the main drugs that they use. It's in that most comfort kits. Those drugs, often the nurses make memes and joke about it being a ham sandwich, Haldol, Ativan, or morphine. And they will threaten the patient, which it sounds like to me, Cara, that in some cases you may have been combative because you weren't dying quick
Mhm.
enough. They will
Right.
threaten to give that to a patient if they get out of bed, if they don't listen to them, if their family members are combative and
Mhm.
argumentative, they will give that to them as a punishment. But they also
Right.
give it to patients, even if you're not doing anything bad or wrong, that's considered that wrong. But
Right.
a ham sandwich, Haldol, Ativan, and morphine. It's not funny, and it is deadly. And in the beers
Mhm.
list, it states do not give that to anybody over 65, which Cara was not, is not. But it says that you shouldn't give that to people except in hospice. And in hospice, all of the rules are off. It doesn't matter
Right.
because the person is there to die and you will help them die
Mhm.
sooner. It, it's
Right.
just a fact.
It's sickening to me.
It
If
is.
someone had told me my father died on hospice right before I was put on hospice. He died in 2015, like a month or before, you know, I was put on hospice. And if someone had told me that this is what hospice was about, or, that this was how it worked, I wouldn't have believed them, because
Right.
I was under the impression that, oh, they can't do that. That would, no, they wouldn't do that. They no, that would be criminal. They couldn't get away with it if they did do that. That doesn't happen. I would have never believed it. I would have thought someone was just upset and angry that they lost their loved one.
Mhm.
That's what I would have thought. I would have never thought or imagined that it was the hospice, you know, itself, the people that actually murdered
Right.
someone.
It's the
And
protocol.
yeah, it's hard to imagine. And, that, they're using it as a weapon. And
Mhm.
then they tried later on, I think I'm pretty sure they were making a move, to take, you know, guardianship of me because I was not cooperating and because Shane was standing in their way very, very much. And because the social worker, uh, I found out later, she had crossed out my medical power of attorney. I have the actual original of where she did that. She crossed out my medical power of attorney, crossed his name and my son's name out, and replaced it with her name and a caregiver's name.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so I think that they were making a move to do that.
I
It
think
didn't work
so.
out for them, but I wouldn't have believed that or anything about the connection between. I knew nothing about guardianship and I knew nothing about hospice other than what I, went through, let alone how they work hand in hand a lot of times. And, so that's why now I'm, an advocate for, hospice and bringing awareness, on that as well as, guardianship because, I'm on the board of the National Guardianship Liberty Movement with Julie Belshie because the hospice, a lot of times, people on guardianship end up dying on hospice.
Right. After they
So,
take all the money, they
right,
take all the money. So how did you
exactly.
get out of hospice?
I They just dropped me.
They
They
dropped
yeah, they just discharged me. I was
you. Okay.
started just really not. I was angry. I just got
Sure.
angry. And,
Mm.
I just was more trouble, I think, that they didn't kill me. And it was time for recertification again, and I think they just chose not to try to recertify me,
Right.
again, because
And when
two and
was
a half
this?
years, June 7th of 2018.
Okay. And so after that, what happens when you go back to the doctor about your muscular dystrophy? What are you then
Well,
told?
first of all, I wasn't able to go to a doctor. I wasn't definitely not gonna go back to the same doctor that put me on hospice.
Yeah.
I was
Right.
in no condition to go doctor shopping because when they discharged me off of hospice, I'm at home. Okay, I had to withdraw off of all those medications all by
Right.
myself without any aftercare. There was no
Mhm.
aftercare. There was no follow-up visits with any doctor. I had tried to contact and call the doctor and in a desperate attempt. And, I got ignored. And so there I was having to wean myself off of all of these drugs all by myself,
Yeah.
and try not to die because I was at a very high risk for dying from the withdrawals. That kills a lot of people. The withdrawals kill so many people. And especially given the state I was in and the fact I have epilepsy, that even increases the risk and the dangers of withdrawing off of those drugs. And it was it was hell. I mean, it was very, very hard, but I did it, even though but if it hadn't been for me hiding medications, I probably would have died. But
Probably.
because of that, I had enough to, you know, get me through the withdrawals. In fact, I still have some left, you know, because I circled a date on the calendar and said, this is going to be the last day I take any of this crap. And I
Right.
stuck to it. And then in 2020, I, you know, went to see a neurologist, and he looked and he read my actual muscle biopsy report and gave me the most shocking news of when he said, I can't believe this. He said, you know, I don't know how to tell you this, but, you know, you don't have muscular dystrophy.
What? After all of this?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
horrible.
He said someone misread your muscle biopsy report, obviously, because this is not at all indicative of muscular dystrophy.
I mean,
Wow.
that's just shocking that they
Yeah.
almost killed you for a disease that you didn't have.
Exactly. And, you know, it shocks me to this day, you
Sure.
know, and it upsets me every time I see it in my medical records to this day. They have that
Sure.
diagnosis in there. And
I
it's ridiculous.
Similarly, just very recently, someone I know in my family was committed to a mental health hospital with a very similar situation where they were given a diagnosis that that they don't have and were medicated, forced medicated. The same story we're hearing quite often. Eventually, I'm going to get to. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts that you want to tell the world about what you've learned, Cara. But before we do, I'm going to ask Marcia to tell us a little bit about what she's been seeing. You're one of many stories that we've heard, of course, of folks that have been betrayed by hospice. But Marcia, do you want to comment on just things that we've been seeing over and over for people that are tuning in and listening to this, things to look
Sure.
out for? Yeah.
Sure. Well, mine, when her date started, in 2017, and Kara and I didn't know each other at that time, but in 2017, my mother was murdered by hospice. And some of the same drugs she's talking about, the morphine, the Ativan, and the fentanyl were used on my mom. Our situation's a little bit different because my dad had been the hospice chaplain of that hospice facility. So we thought she would be safe. And like Kara, we had no reason to think that hospice was anything other than great and compassionate. We found out differently. They showed up at the house, kind of like Kara said in her situation. They showed up at the house and talked my parents into going into the respite facility because mom had been recertified as well and gone over the 6 months. And she was getting ready to revoke them because they would show up and do absolutely nothing, and they kept sending different people. So they took her into the hospital, into the hospice respite facility, and they murdered her. My sister and I went down there. We don't live in the same state, but we went down to Georgia and tried to take her to the hospital, but they talked us out of it, saying that she would, if she was given fluids, that they would go around her heart and she would die from drowning. And that's a horrible way to die, sweetie. You don't want your mom to die like that. So they act like they're so compassionate. They're not. My mother died, which started me on my path to talking to other people, doing a talk show, allowing people, as Cara and other people that have lost loved ones, to tell their story. It's therapeutic to be able to let people know, to share your story. And I belong to a Facebook group called Murdered by Hospice. And we have 7,000 people in that group. And those are only the ones that have found us. The problem is that everybody believes that hospice is wonderful. They're compassionate. They're just going to be there in times of need to, show the family love and to help your person die peacefully. It is not a death peacefully, as Cara has said, when she was being given all these, you can't think, head is spinning. There's nothing peaceful about taking a loved one away from their family. And when you find out they died not peacefully in their sleep, They died drugged into a coma, which appears like it's in their sleep, and they were murdered. That's the straight facts are murdered. So that's, kind of how I got involved. That was 9 years ago, coming up on 9 years. I wrote a book about it, Betrayed by Hospice and Healthcare, that lists all of the stories. We had 34 stories in there, and it has information about the drugs, at why hospice does that. There is an aggregate cap. 6 months is about how much it will cover for that person. And as in Cara's case, she went over that, recertified multiple times, and was in there for over 2 years. They were losing money on her. But what they do is somebody who comes in that they are able to kill, or that naturally dies with maybe a little help from them, but in a month or 2 months, in a shorter period of time, in that 6 months, they can take the extra money from that. And then they would say, well, we have this other client, patient, and we did this and this and this for them. So they kind of borrow the money from that other money that the other patient did not use. So it's like a pot. So that's kind of how the aggregate cap works. Even if a hospice is nonprofit, they are in it for business. They're not doing this as a free service. It's not a volunteer work. It's a business. They're in it to make money. So
Sure.
that's kind of my capsule of information. But Teresa, thank you for asking.
Oh, absolutely. And we want everybody, that is listening to the story now. And if you know someone, or if you've gone through it yourself, we want people to go find, of course, your page, or they can also come to Betrayal Project USA, and we can also help connect folks. But I wanted to kind of steer back to Cara now, just to understand a little bit on the impact of your life. Of course, going through now, finding you have a wrong diagnosis, almost being murdered, if it were not for your family member to get to have some sense of what's happening and to stand up and to get you out there. But maybe you want to talk a little bit about the impact on your life of everything that's happened, and also now your view of the hospital systems.
Well, I will never be the same. And I do believe that they did kill me, just not in their timeline. There was so much damage done from the drugs, from everything that happened, from everything they didn't do, everything they did do, that it affected me to the point of, I have chronic vertebral fractures. My bones are very brittle because of all the steroids that they gave me every single day. It depleted the calcium, out of my bones. I lost all my teeth because of all the drugs and the lack of, brushing my teeth or even giving me a toothbrush. But my life will never be the same because I can't sleep. I have a hard time. It's almost impossible to sleep because I think a lot of it has to do with the, flashbacks or PTSD. I don't know, however you call it, whatever you call it. It's because it's hard spending that amount of time in a hospital bed and wondering every time I closed my eyes if, I'd ever open them again. Was this going to be the time? Would I ever see my son again? And um, I'm angry. It leaves a lot of anger, and it hurt. I'll never get that time back. I'll never get that health back. I'll never be able to look at things the same way again, without worry, without concern, without the same hesitation, that I have now. I'll never be that carefree, you know, lady, you know, that I was before. I'll always be mistrustful. I'll always, you know, be worried. It's a constant worry that I have that, they'll do it again.
Yeah.
They'll try again.
If
And
you could, if you could give one piece of advice to people that are listening to this and that you want the world to know, what are you going to tell them?
Be very, very careful. Be very proactive. Don't just trust one doctor. Don't trust two doctors. Hold on to your loved ones, and don't ever feel like you're alone or that you have to. Be very proactive, be very aware, and always, if you choose hospice, make sure you are in control and you have loved ones surrounding you at all times to monitor what they are giving you. Plan it if you can. Although, how do you plan it? I don't know, but just be very careful, be very much aware of that this is happening and this is their goal. The sooner you die, the more money they make. And that's just a fact. And your loved one, you may never know that they murdered your loved one, because when you die on hospice, they don't do autopsies on people who die on hospice. They take them straight to the funeral home.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And so you don't know, you'll never know unless you're there at all times, or unless it's what you want. And also, I want to say something that I feel is very important. Before this, I always thought that, like with my father, morphine would be a pleasant way to go. You just overdose on morphine, you close your eyes, you go to sleep. And that's not the case. It felt like drowning in concrete a lot of times. I would sometimes be totally aware. I could feel, I could hear everybody talking, but I could not respond. I will never forget one time my son, I could hear him crying over the phone, wanting to talk to me, and he was screaming, "Mom." And I couldn't respond. I couldn't even tell him I love you or goodbye, and he didn't think I could hear him, but I could. They didn't think I could feel them touching me or handling me rough at times. Oh, but I could.
Yeah.
It's not pleasant at all. It's torture.
That is so important for the world to know, that the way the hospitals and the hospice is selling this product, right, is that this is gonna take away all your worries. We're gonna take away all your pain, and we're gonna make everything better for you. And that comes with a whole lot of things that you don't know about, you're not informed about, you're not educated about, and so there are other ways. So to let everybody know that, and to have some hope that there are different organizations and doctors out there that can help you with your situation in a different way. Marcia Joyner's team is a very good place to start with. Betrayal Project USA is another to come. We connect people with advocates that can help in your situation. We also connect people with resources of doctors that are doing different things, or people that have had success stories even. So certainly come to our website, Betrayal Project USA, if you have a story very similar to this one. Marcia, are there any other last words that you'd like to kind of hear?
Well, I agree with Cara, and I think simply stated, knowledge is power. You have the ability to go out there and look at the drugs before they are given to you, and to research everything. And as you were talking about resources, I was thinking halovoice.org is a great resource. Foundation Aiding the Elderly is a good resource. Life Legal Defense Foundation, they have access to pro-life attorneys. Sometimes they do pro bono work. So if you're in a situation like this and you need an attorney, you can contact them to see if there's one in your area. Almost all states have right to life groups. I know Texas has a really good one. They're very active. And just don't trust what you're being told. Just knowledge is power. And, the resources that Teresa has mentioned, there are resources out there. We're all happy to help you. It's our passion. the only goal we have is, these are not paid positions. The only goal we have is to save people from going through what we went through and from dying.
Right.
So that these, thank you
Right.
so much, Teresa, for
Yes.
for having the Betrayal Project so that people like us can come on and try to warn other people. That's what it's about. So thank
Right.
you.
Thank you. And Cara, again, thank you. We are so thrilled that you're here with us today, that you stayed strong in understanding that something wasn't quite right. And that's really what
Right.
we want everybody to take away, that there's
Right.
another way. And it's such a great thing to have you here with us today, sharing
Thank
your
you.
story with the world, letting people know that, hey, there are things happening with hospice and in hospitals. If anybody has a story similar to Cara's, or even a COVID-19 hospital death story, please contact Betrayal Project USA. You'll be connected with a volunteer like myself, or with like Marcia, who will take your intake and help you to walk through with an advocate to tell your story and to make sure that your story is never forgotten and that people know what's going on. So thank you, everybody, for joining today. Cara, thank you. Marcia, thank you for joining. And I hope
Thank you for
everybody
having me.
can tune in again. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you so much.